Welcome to our explainer on the massive, sweeping story of America's transformation. Today, we're tracking a journey that spans thousands of years. We're talking moving from incredibly diverse, thriving indigenous civilizations all the way to the nation's modern position as a global superpower. It's a huge story, right? But we're going to break it down to clearly understand how the past literally shaped the reality we live in today. Let's get into it. Here is the roadmap for our journey. We've got 5 clear chapters: roots and early colonization, revolution and rapid expansion, the Civil War era, becoming a global superpower, and finally, the underlying forces driving America. All right, Chapter 1, Roots and Early Colonization. Our story actually begins way before that famous date of 1492. We're rapidly crossing from eras of flourishing indigenous societies straight into the permanent arrival of European powers in the early 1600s. You've got the British settling Jamestown in 1607, the Pilgrims hitting Plymouth in 1620, and boom, this kicks off an intense era of European rivalry that lasts well into the 1700s. Now, what's truly fascinating here is the sheer diversity of life prior to European arrival. North America was already home to millions of people in highly organized societies. You had the Mississippian culture, who were these complex urban builders. Down in the Southwest, the Pueblo peoples ran advanced agricultural societies. And up north, the Iroquois Confederacy operated a highly sophisticated democratic political alliance. So this absolutely was not an empty continent. It was a vibrant, deeply diverse world. Following the arrival of European powers, Great Britain established 13 distinct colonies along the Atlantic coast, and over the next century, they built a booming economy. But, and this is absolutely crucial to understand, that economy was heavily reliant on agriculture, transatlantic trade, and fundamentally, the brutal enslavement of African people. This economic foundation really set the stage for much of the nation's future wealth, but also its very deepest conflicts. Chapter 2, Revolution and Rapid Expansion. Accelerating into the late 18th century, the colonies and Great Britain hit a breaking point over taxation without representation. Tensions finally boiled over into open war in 1775, and on July 4, 1776, the colonies officially declared independence. This set into motion a ridiculously powerful foundational ideal that all men are created equal. By formally severing ties with Britain, and eventually defeating them with some crucial aid from France, these colonies established the world's first modern constitutional republic, anchored by this massive, albeit then unrealized, promise. Following the war, the new nation just exploded in size. After winning independence under General George Washington, the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 triggered this massive, sweeping territorial growth. But listen, this rapid expansion carried profound consequences. Sure, it fueled a booming economy, but it also actively decimated Native American populations and intensified fierce, unavoidable political battles over whether these new territories would allow slavery. Chapter 3, the Civil War era. So, the rapid growth of the country, paired with those unresolvable battles over slavery, put the young nation on an unavoidable collision course. By 1861, the boiling point was reached, and the country fractured. You had the Union trying to maintain the nation, totally pitted against the Confederacy, which was a newly formed coalition of 11 southern states that seceded in direct opposition. The tension finally snapped, and open war began. The crucial thing to grasp here is the sheer scale and devastation of the resulting war, represented by this number, 4. 4 years of brutal, mechanized combat from 1861 to 1865. To put that into perspective, those 4 years remain the absolute deadliest conflict in United States history. It was a profound tragedy that fundamentally ripped apart and altered the fabric of the nation. Emerging from this devastating fracture, the nation was transformed. Under the leadership of President Abraham Lincoln, the Union was held together, and perhaps most importantly, the 13th Amendment was passed, permanently abolishing slavery. The war saved the nation, but it also forced it to take a massive, painful step toward actually aligning its reality with those initial founding ideals we talked about earlier. Chapter 4, Becoming a Global Superpower. The reunited country now hits the afterburners, entering an era of incredibly rapid modernization, mass immigration, and expanding global influence. The compression of monumental events here is just staggering. Starting around 1870, the U.S. pivots from a largely agrarian society to an absolute industrial titan during the Gilded Age. The nation is then pulled into the massive global conflicts of the 20th century, entering World War I in 1917 and World War II in 1941. And emerging from the immense destruction of the Second World War as both an economic and nuclear powerhouse, America steps right into a brand new global order, kicking off the Cold War standoff by 1947. Now, what's really fascinating about the post-war era is this stark dual reality. On a global scale, the U.S. was engaged in a massive, decades-long geopolitical standoff with the Soviet Union. But simultaneously, on a domestic level, America was undergoing a profound social reckoning during the 1950s and 60s. So the country was essentially fighting a war of ideology abroad while fighting to fix its own glaring inequalities right at home. That domestic reckoning was, of course, the civil rights movement. Led by powerful figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., this movement directly challenged the systemic racial segregation that had plagued the country for generations. Through immense courage and grassroots organization, they successfully secured vital legal and voting protections that permanently reshaped the country's social and political fabric. Chapter 5. The Forces Driving America. We've covered a tremendous amount of chronological ground. Now let's zoom all the way out past the specific dates to examine the underlying engine driving this whole machine. Let's dive into 3 major defining themes. These aren't just historical footnotes, right? They are continuous, persistent dynamics shaping history from day one. We're talking about the democratic experiment, immigration and culture, and economic shift. Understanding these 3 things is absolutely essential to understanding the world you live in today. First up, the democratic experiment. It's so important to realize this wasn't just a single magical moment locked in 1776. It is a centuries-long, ongoing effort to actually realize those powerful founding ideals in practical reality. The history of the U.S. is really the constant and sometimes violent struggle to make the phrase all men are created equal a reality for everyone. Next, we have immigration and culture. Waves of global immigration have constantly washed over and reshaped the nation. Now, this dynamic brings a beautiful, unmatched blending of global cultures. But, as history constantly shows us, it also brings periods of significant societal friction. New waves of people continuously reshape the American workforce, its politics, and its social identity. It's a country forever changing its own reflection. Finally, the grand economic shift. This perfectly tracks the nation's stunning transformation. I mean, we started with isolated colonial farms, evolved into a massive, booming manufacturing giant during the industrial age, and have now transitioned into the post-industrial, high-tech financial leader of the modern global order. The American economy is literally an entity that constantly reinvents itself. Seeing how these powerful historical forces have continuously driven the nation forward through revolution, expansion, civil war, and global dominance, we're left looking forward, because the American arc definitely isn't finished. So we have to ask ourselves, as the democratic experiment continues, what will the next great chapter of this incredible transformation look like? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.